But they all disappear from view. Shabub shabub. Yes, hello everybody. Well, we finally did it. We made it to a day that is a multiple of 11 and 3. That's day 33 of our continuous editing stream. I'm your host, Zach ZYZ. And what you can see on your screen yesterday we cracked 300 fucking pages. So I can't believe that we have edited 300 pages of this story. By the way, I'm a huge Lucha Libre fan, as you may be able to see from my shirt right there. Shout outs to Espanto. It's my favorite wrestler. I can't believe we made it. So now I'm looking at the other screen and wild stuff. So last night I went to a fundraiser for a Democratic Socialist candidate, and it was actually like a pretty okay fundraiser. I really, she was just a state level senator, so most of her concerns are about shit like rent control and just developers and social programs and so forth. And like most of the things that I care about politically are on a larger national scale. But yeah, it got me to think. I mean, I'm a big fan of a lot of very progressive social programs, but I think that pretty much any time that you have a social program where you're giving somebody something, it needs to come with a terrible cost to it, right? I'm just a big fan of what I like to call monkey's paw economics. And I'm happy to get into what exactly that entails, but it's a lot like, hey, we'll give you, free college, we'll pay for your housing, we'll pay for your food, and so forth. But until you attain a certain threshold of success, we'll sterilize you with something like a reversible vasectomy or an IUD or something like that. There were a lot of, I'm just a big fan of monkeys and their paws and wishes that don't turn out the way that you want them to be. So really, to me, politics is just one big, long, sinister excuse to fuck with people. Stratum says, shout outs to humiliating form filling and means testing. Yeah, I've been through quite a few of these bureaucracy. Just collecting unemployment is like, what the fuck? It's so demeaning. But at the same time, especially since the whole time that I collected unemployment for like 3 months, you got a license for that, baby. Good God Almighty. Well, something's gonna have to happen right there, because we're definitely gonna hit a period where the vast majority of people cannot find a fucking job just to literally save their lives. And we have to have a game plan for a situation where automation is a huge deal. And, hopefully that solution isn't like gray work camps where people are like toiling at meaningless tasks to preserve the dignity of work or whatever. This book is too long. I should split it in half and sell double the copies. So when you think about that, right, you have to think, is there a character arc that's satisfactory in each book? And we have to say no. Like, we're literally at this point, the story is like right about here. And at the end of the book, we need to be like up here and then another monkey's paw. Good morning to everybody joining the chat there. Good morning. Yeah, in any case, so we've been at this for a long, long time, and we will have to work harder, I think, to make our deadline, because the chapters are getting longer. It's driving me crazy that I can't see a word count on this, by the way. I should really, if somebody could remind me at the end of the stream to unplug HDMI and try and find where the word count got off to, that would be great. Apple and their hidden word counts. Do books have DLC? Yeah, you can unlock Hotter Freya if you just if you pre-order Gravid Freya is hotter and has a sparkly gold tinge as you're reading to make sure that everybody knows that you are an affluent influencer type individual. Lord have mercy. So yeah, I'll tell you one thing I didn't hear out at that fundraiser. Nobody talking about the situation in Iran. There's a almost like palpable pallor, and I don't think I would ever write palpable pallor, but there's like a pallor over everyone. They're just a little bit worried about it, but it was a fun time. The senator was very nice, and there was a bunch of free food. And despite it being a fundraiser, nobody took my money. So, yeah, they should have like passed around a box with like a slit in the top, but they never did. So, free eats. I'll have to make it up to them at some point. I think that was their strategy, that you would feel bad and then fill out your credit card information, and then they could just rob you later. But the word of God is read in the DLC. Huh. Interesting. Can you imagine the like having DLC for a book where essentially the DLC is the book is written in one character's perspective, but for DLC it's written in the omniscient perspective, so you can see everything that's going on that the one character missed. Holy shit, that would be kind of, I'm making a note of that. Yeah. And take a note.
What do you want it to say?
Book written in first person singular, but the DLC for the book is that it's written in third person omniscient. LOL. Penis pump. Read that back to me. All right, enough, Siri. Yeah, so I don't know how you make Siri read your note back to you. But yeah, that's a good note. I also had another idea yesterday that I made a note for. Yeah. $6 for descriptions of his dick. If you don't pay, then you just get a gray box where it used to be. Yeah, everybody's a nullo. Unless you pay for... Yeah, I really could have taken the like more pornographic segments of this book and just saved them, and then just had like a juicy bits add-on there where the outright porno just makes it through the cut. But the dicks do not, because I guess people will pay more for uncircumcised penises. Yeah, so I had another interesting idea for a story. And normally I tell people, don't talk about your story ideas before you work on them. But this is one where I actually don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. It was this idea that I was talking to the senator and hearing a bunch about procedurals that are like the infighting in Albany a lot. And I got this idea that essentially legislation is just software that is running the program of government and running it poorly. And I started thinking, well, like, if it doesn't work, and like we haven't made any major code modifications to that legislation in a long time. And I thought about, would it be interesting to write one of these utopian future type things where you have like a Moneyball type situation where some genius, and you'd have to make it a woman of some sort to sell the book, but some genius woman comes up with this idea, like she's a coder or something. She's like, what if we ran the government like a Scrum team, right? And like had, bug testing and fucking QA people and all that on. Just the idea of treating legislation as code. I don't know if that would even be interesting. I don't know enough about coding to really make a convincing pitch for this. But it just seemed like the kind of thing where immediately it would be kind of interesting to find out about it. So I don't know if that's even a good idea. Wow, Starball Tentacle DLC. Queen Scrum Lord. Oh, wow. Queen of the Scrum. I like the sound of that. That has a very Mad Max ring to it. I like the sound of that. Well, yeah. Well, I'm glad you guys like that idea, because I think it's a pretty good one. Yeah, like one of my goals is to get more short stories published in publications like Lightspeed and Clark's World and so forth. And the thing is that I'm not woke enough to. Oh, this is the first time that somebody's requested a poem. It's been a hot second since we've read one of these. People just got bored of it there. I'm just going to flip to a random page. So this is Charles Baudelaire and from Flowers of Evil. And we're going to read a fantastic engraving. A fantastic engraving. Uncanny apparition, all it wears, grotesquely canted on that grinning skull, is a garland woven out of worms. No spurs, no whip, and still this ghostly cavalier urges his apocalyptic nag onward till her flaring nostrils bleed, horse and horseman in mad pursuit of space, trampling infinity with reckless hooves. The rider brandishes a flaming sword. Above the nameless hordes he gallops down, and like a prince inspecting his domain, quarters that unending graveyard, where a bleak white sun exposes, mile on mile, history's hecatombs, ancient and modern both. Oh, and yeah, you're supposed to clock your tongue at the end of every poem. That's how the French do it. So Jiro says, expand on that. I think there was an original Star Trek episode where they fought wars based on a computer randomly assigning the amount of casualties on each side. It popped in my head with the new computerish laws. Yeah, I mean, definitely we'll hit a point where, like already, I think a big part of why the system works so poorly. Everybody's like, oh, it's corruption, and oh, it's graft, and oh, this and that. I'm sure that money has like undue influence on the process, and that a lot of the legislative code base is basically just people working to keep certain people from having power, right? They use the legislation to shuffle around where the power is at, and they try to keep other people from obtaining said power. And I would assume that roughly 60 to 70% of all the time that legislative units spend is spent on sort of inter-party power struggles. But that said, even like the 30% that's actually legislating, which may be like a very generous idea, we have to admit that process is very poorly designed at this point and in need of significant revision, just in terms of streamlining how it's actually done. The fact that you can still attach like riders to bills and clog up the whole works, and literally like any one unit can filibuster, and you need like a super majority to go after him. Let me see. There's a good part where the lead character wins her presidential nomination and running her campaign like an agile software build. Let me see. Sequels can be her systematically updating parts of the government and legislature. And it's like, okay, guys, what are we going to, which department are we going to take on this sprint? And you would really write it. So I think the key to a novel like that, successfully designing it, and I may not be the right person to deal with it because I don't really know much of anything about programming, but you would really write it like a YA novel, right? And so YA novels have kind of a predictable trajectory that will sound very familiar as you're reading this novel, which is something bad happens to the protagonist. They're socially outcast. They work really hard. Everybody recognizes their hidden talents. They hook up with the hot guy or the hot girl or somebody they think is too hot for them, and they defeat their nemesis, and with the power of love or imagination or whatever we're trying to shill in this book, and then everybody lives happily ever after. That's the arc. Secret Service daily stand-up. See, so this is like the kind of nerd shit that we would have to shoehorn into. I think it's a good idea for a story. And that's one where we would be well served to like potentially do it on stream where nerds could get in. There's zingers like that. That would be fantastic. But let us not forget that we are sitting at just 295 pages out of 786. A monumental task remains to us in this sprint, and this is just version 0.1. We have a long way to go before this all. We're like in the pre-alpha right now, and we want to get to the beta. Mm. And I'm not even fucking with you, because the beta, what we call these people, are beta readers. So we're really in the trenches now. Well, let's get down to it. So if you've never tuned into the stream before, want to just hear an old man rattling about irrelevant political nonsense, this is an editing stream. We're editing my 8th novel, GRAVID. And so this is, as you can see, like a giant ass book. It's about 200,000 words. It's probably a little bit above that. We're probably about 210,000 now, because we've been adding stuff to it more than we've been taking it away as we're doing this edit. So this is a story of a young woman who becomes very depressed after her father is killed. She attempts suicide, but is thwarted by the crash of a meteorite behind her. And as she begins to examine this meteorite, she rekindles the love of astronomy that she shared with her father, and soon learns that indeed it is no meteorite at all. It is a piece of alien technology. Piece of alien technology. And as she investigates this weird orb, she's starting to find out that it may not be so wise to carry an alien probe in your pocket all the time. And that's the point that we're at right here. So it's a lot about grief. It's a lot about the limits of communication between human beings. And it's a lot about battling depression there. So yeah, that's about it. Alien, yeah. So the process here has been pretty simple. Generally, like, I'm reading each line aloud, and we're doing that to try and get it to sound good when it's read as an audiobook, but also to get sort of the meter for the speech. I think if something sounds good when you're reading it aloud, it will sound or it will read smoother, right? There will be fewer snags, and it'll be easier to read through this big long ass book. So I've been writing for a long time, and on this book, really, I'm spending a lot more time thinking about how readers will take certain things. What can I do to make the experience better for them? What parts are just superfluous and me like showboating? What can we do to make this a book that will reach out and touch people and get them to give me their money? So, I mean, and that aside, I would love to have a really powerful book at the end of this. And I think if we look through what we've done so far in these first 43 chapters and so forth, we've taken it from a story that I thought was a pretty good story at the start. But now I think it is a much more powerful story than it was. I think the new decisions made in this draft are stronger. They're closer to the mark in terms of truth that somebody can take away from them. And they're just much, much smoother. And I feel much more confident taking this to a publisher and saying, hey, here's 4 years of my work. Turn it down so that I can fucking publish it myself, because I don't really need you people. That's not going to be my publisher pitch. But basically, when I want to actually get this book edited by a professional, it's going to cost me somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 to have somebody sit down. And if that seemed like a lot to you at the very beginning of it, think about how many hours it's taken me to do this. A professional editor doing good work is faster than I am, much, much faster. They don't have to set up the stream. They can work on this 8 hours a day if they need to. And they're not doing sort of some of the heavy retooling work that we're doing here. But just the same, you can see it's just a tremendous amount of work to go through all of this and to make it better. And generally, a good developmental editor will sometimes charge some of these people want $100 an hour. If you want a Hugo or a Nebula or something like that, it's not outside of the realm of possibility. And in my own experiences hiring editors, I don't think that you can get a good one for under about $40 an hour. And this is after hiring several editors and seeing the work that I was able to get by hiring them at different rates. And I think about $40 an hour is what you need for somebody who is well done who is well connected in the industry. I would estimate it would probably take about how long would this take? It'd probably take about 80 hours for for like a regular editor to get through this, and most of them charge by the word, so you could plug it in what everything would cost. Um, but yeah, it's fucking it's a pricey thing. And before we set off on this, I wouldn't have paid it, right? Just one, I don't have it, so I'd have to, I don't know, knock off a bank or something like that to get that money. But two, it just wasn't good enough to like hand it off to an editor. It wouldn't have come out well. Uh, and hold on just a second, fucking Juan. God, so much of my life is just banning people that can't take a hint, you know. But anyhow, let's get down to the editing. So shout outs to everybody joining me for this early in the morning on Monday morning. It's great to have you here. I think it's fucking fantastic. So, with leaden steps, Freya dragged herself from class to class. Everyone was looking at her strangely. She couldn't escape the thought that everyone knew. Okay, so already I see a problem. Mm-hmm. So I think leaden steps is not an effective metaphor. Freya dragged herself from class to class. Mm. No, I actually feel kind of shitty about taking out with leaden steps. Let's Freya dragged herself from class to class, feeling an audience. Uh, uh, All right, so she's dragging herself from class to class, and she always feels like somebody's watching me, and I have no privacy. Whoa. I love that Rockwell song. Yeah, this is just kind of like overblown. With leaden steps, Freya dragged herself from class to class. Okay, I kind of like that. So, Freya had an audience all day, but no one was applauding. Everyone knew about this morning, and they'd all taken Jane's side. People liked Jane. Freya and Radomir were the weirdos now. Now she couldn't open her mouth without feeling like she was flubbing a line. Okay, so like a lot of parrying and like fencing around to hold on just a second. Oh, okay. But yeah, a lot of people or a lot of sort of fencing around to get to that one. but I think significantly stronger than our first effort. The first effort, like with leaden steps, she dragged herself from class to class. Well, that's simple, right? But it's also um, we've like gone to the well of talking about weight on, and I'm sure other places in this chapter we've gone to that well, and here we can just expend like a little bit more effort and turn it into the stage metaphor. And I like the way that it goes. I like the idea of this like flubbing a line thing here. Yeah, like significantly more interesting than just like this like one off like somebody, because there's so much language in this about how she's depressed and like how unhappy she is and so forth. And I think any spot where we can turn that kind of gray and oppressive language into a more lively thing. um, I'll tell you right now, like one of the main criticisms that we'll receive about this book is that it's depressing as fuck. And it's okay to be depressing as fuck if you're still interesting. But if you're depressing and boring, drop that motherfucker right in the trash can like a copy of the Song of Sword or whatever we call it, the awful. I know exactly what it's called because that crappy fantasy book is in like 4 of my other books. It's like my go-to awful book. I don't. Hopefully, there's not like actually a book named The Song of Sword, because it's in like survival mode, and it's in this one, and it's in Rub. Oh, it's wild there. So that's a little better. Um, let's see here. Freya kept her eyes low during class, resisting the urge to lie her head on her desk and close her eyes. Oh, this is so many instances of just. And if I say just that much time, or that many times in the book, I must say it all the time in my day to day. So there's no justice, there's just ice. The teacher spoke, but the words came to her distant and garbled, like they were being shouted across a river. She should have gone home, but she didn't have the energy to get on the bicycle. When she thought about taking a cab, the first thing that came to mind was Lassa's closet and Randall's gun. It was safer to coast through the rest of the day. She went to the library during lunch to avoid everyone. She tried to read the paperback, but the words were just blank lines on paper with no significance. She kept getting halfway through the same page and drifting off, something about the starship pilot outraging the ship's chef by ordering a cheeseburger with an egg on it. The thought made her queasy. The constant hunger that had gnawed at Freya was gone now. That had been the starball. The idea of eating anything seemed impossible. Freya needed to call Mr. Mathis and tell him she was too sick for practice, but at the end of every period she found she couldn't. He was one of those old people who pretended text messages didn't exist. As the day went on, it was worse and worse to cancel on such short notice. She knew how he would sound, bitter and let down. She'd been trying so hard and practicing so much. It seemed impossible. God. Fucking congestion? Hell yeah. Oh yeah. Shout outs to Die for IRC. In the other chat right there, the song that he gave us was amazing. Yeah, do me a favor and message me, or just type the name of that song so I can remember it. I'm gonna check that guy out. It was this really good. What's the story on that guy? Because the album cover is like a guy with like a Hasidic beard and one of their hats. But the jazz was amazing. It's like one of the better songs I've heard like so far this year. Although I've not heard that many songs this year. So yeah, shout outs to Die for RC. He's a real one. But anyhow, uh, it seemed impossible she'd been looking forward to seeing him tonight. Impossible she'd been looking forward to him. See, that's too much. Let me just take that out. It seemed impossible she had been looking forward to seeing him tonight. So this paragraph doesn't work if we take that out. She knew how he would sound, bitter and let down. She had been trying so hard and practicing so much, and it was all for nothing. She could barely keep her head up. It seemed impossible she had been looking forward to seeing him tonight. Impossible she had been looking forward to anything. It seemed impossible she'd been looking forward to seeing him tonight just hours ago. Instead, she took a long time packing up at the end of each class, so no one had time to talk to her as she walked to the next. She could see uncertainty in the faces of her teachers. They wanted to say something, but each decided against it. They knew the answer. They had to all be so tired of dealing with her, the anchor dragging their classes down. The text from Dan she'd been dreading came just before the last period of the day. Hey, I heard what happened. Are you okay? She typed in no, then deleted it, typed it again and deleted it again. Then she sent nothing. More than anything, she didn't want to be seen. More than anything, she didn't want to see Dan or be seen by him. The girl from last night was just an illusion. He would run away from the real Freya as quickly as he could, and he would be right to. So, did she not send a message, or did she send a blank message? Ooh. So she sends nothing, right? Let's take a look at this. Then she sent nothing. Ooh, I like. That's I didn't think about that interpretation of sending a blank message. So one, you can't send like a blank text message. Like you can't. I guess you could send somebody a space. But yeah, it's interesting. I'm gonna leave it like that, right? Here's an instance where I like the ambiguity that created in your mind. And generally, like ambiguity is the enemy. But here, I like your interpretation of just sending like a blank message, and I want to leave that in. That's something like where definitely a second editor could come through and be like, nah, you can't have that ambiguity because they won't have this thing of ours. You know what I'm saying? Uh, they don't get to have an audience while they're editing, and just one of the most fascinating things about working on books and writing books is you have as many interpretations of a sentence as you have readers, and like some of them are going to be pretty close to each other, but people will fucking surprise you, man. And I love, this is not just me telling you a story. It's a dance where like half is the reader making up their interpretation, and half is me trying to lead that dance. And some of them readers are going to lead themselves, and just don't get your feet clomped on. That's so wild. Sent nothing. Okay, so here she said Freya didn't reply to the text, right? So we have that initial, like, did this happen? And then we solidify later on. Perfect. Cool. So we get ambiguity resolution. So there's also like, if we want to think about it there, it's enjoyable to be like, I wonder what this is, right? If we create a question and then answer that question immediately, there's like a little bit of a pop of like, oh, okay. So I like that. Like, Freya didn't reply to the text. She sat through Mr. Mazzini's class, his words drumming against her head like drops of rubbing alcohol. Each evaporated before the next could strike. I like so I think that this is a little bit of a labored metaphor here in a chapter that's full of relatively labored metaphors, but I like this, so I'm not going to take it out. That's for somebody else's problem here, and I don't want to get too much into somebody else's problem. So if you ever feel, um, if ever something in this is just straight making you roll your eyes, and I think I'm going to leave it in there, it's totally fine to be like, "Yo, Zach, what are you doing? That's too much," right? um, because I'm biased, you know. There's definitely like a selective process where the person who's writing will be more inclined to some of these larger dramatic rises because they've seen everything so many times that the words aren't like sinking into them the same way. So they can try and escalate the language a little bit so that they can feel something again. And like for a reader coming to it the first time, it's like, whoa, why go in so far and so forth? Because they haven't had that numbing experience of seeing the words so many different times. So that's why external editors are so critical, because there's definitely like some power creep in the language as I'm seeing more and more revisions, and my own words have less and less ability to reach me, which is like kind of like a fascinating dynamic and not one that I had really thought about too much prior to just making that up right there. But it's something that definitely happens. Power creep in writing. So wild. So one thing finally sunk in. The words, "This will be on the test," written underneath the words "binomial radical expressions" and underlined 3 times. Okay, so I'm going to make a typesetting note. Done. Okay, so just FYI, they're underlining something 3 times is not something that you can do in default. When we go to InDesign and have to put this together, what will wind up happening there is that we'll put an image of those words there and underline it 3 times. And that will only be in the print version there. It won't be in the EPUB or whatever there. Because you can underline things in Mobi files and EPUBs and so forth, but you can't do like those kind of 3 times. Some of them can display inline images, but things like the Kindle won't necessarily display inline images correctly. So it's just one spot where, like for an ebook, we wouldn't include that little aside. But for the print book, I can absolutely have full control about how everything will appear on the page, which I love. So we can actually shoehorn that in there and just have that little nod towards like this is what it's like. One thing finally sunk in, the words, "This will be on the test," written under the words "binomial radical expressions" and underlined 3 times. They were underlined 3 times, written under the words "binomial radical expressions." None of that made sense to Freya. None of that made sense to Freya. How long has she been checked out of this class? She loved math last year. That burst of understanding as she figured something out, the feeling of things locking into place, everything expanding. And so, yeah, that's actually like a really good feel, like that, like the feeling of your horizons expanding as you begin to grasp something that's difficult, which is, I was not like the strongest math student, but even I, like from time to be like, oh, is that how that works? So hopefully people can relate to that whole deal. Mm. She was going to fail that test. It wasn't like she could even study and figure out what she'd missed. Her trigonometry textbook was in the locker with the star ball. So, just FYI, in the initial draft of this, we did not have the section where she like threw her books in the thing. That was something that we added later, so that it would track with this section here. So that's just me going back and doing a little bookkeeping and foreshadowing. Freya saw everyone else taking out their textbooks and realized she was supposed to be working through problems now. She was the only one without a book. Mr. Mazzini's eyes fell on her, and a disappointed look crossed his face. He bent down and disappeared behind his desk, then popped back up with a textbook wrapped in green construction paper. He walked over to Freya's desk with his odd gait. He had a club foot. The audience was watching. Please remember your textbook next time, Miss Jokla, Mr. Mazzini said quietly. Mr. Mazzini said quietly. Everyone in the class stared at her. The homemade dust jacket said, Book of Shame, in giant letters written in marker. So yeah, like this is a big chapter for words in quotes. That's like the third one that we've had right here. I don't know why I was in that mood at the time, but here we are. Shouts to everybody who's still viewing through this here. It's wild. So normally, Mr. Manzini made a big joke about it, and the student would ham up being embarrassed and remember their book next time. Somehow, it was so much worse when he didn't go through his routine. I'm sorry, was all Freya could choke out, but Mr. Manzini had already turned around and started scraping back towards his desk. She struggled to make sense of the lesson. She flipped back in the book. She flipped backward in the book with mounting desperation, finding only other lessons she had been just as zoned out for. Stumbling through other lessons she had been just as zoned out for. Freya was going to fail this class. She was going to fail this class. Freya had never failed before. Her grades had been the only thing she could really cling to say that she was okay. Now that was gone too, and all she could think about was the river. She didn't have a climbing harness, but she could just put on her heaviest coat and fill the pockets with rocks. It would be enough. So we don't need it would be enough there. The class ended, and she still hadn't figured out what she was supposed to be doing. Her head was full of people she was supposed to call. The class ended, and she still hadn't figured out anything. Her head was full of people she was supposed to call. She was supposed to... Let's see if there's a, if we can break up all the supposed. Alleged, apparent. So supposed is like a step under required, needed to call, recommended, compulsory, called for, demanded. Had to call. Yeah. Her head was full of the people she was supposed to call. She was supposed to call Mr. Mathis and canceled. She was supposed to call Dr. Garboglio and let him know she was having suicidal thoughts. She ought to call Dan and ask him for help. Yeah, I think here we just have to like hammer suppose. Her head was full of people she was supposed to call. She was supposed to call Mr. Mathis and cancel. She was supposed to call Dr. Garbuglio and let him know she was having suicidal thoughts. She was supposed to call Dan and ask for help. She should be. Uh, yeah, so this is a tough paragraph to actually kind of work through there. She was supposed to call Mr. Mathis and cancel. She was supposed to call. Yeah. This is hurting my head right here. Her head was full of people she was supposed to call. She needed to call Mr. Mathis to cancel. She ought to call Dan and ask him for help. She was supposed to call Dr. Garbuglio and let him know she was having suicidal thoughts. She should be calling the authorities and warning them about the Starball, but she couldn't. Okay. So yeah, it's not. I don't think it's an effective device to just repeat supposed all the time, because that word just loses all meaning to me. And like, let's read through that. Where is it? The class ended and she hadn't figured out anything. Her head was full of people she was supposed to call. She needed to call Mr. Mathis to cancel guitar lesson. She ought to call Dan and ask him for help. She was supposed to call Dr. Garbuglio and let him know she was having suicidal thoughts. On top of all that, why would she have suicidal thoughts if the Starball can give her dopamine? So in this section right here, Jira, she has locked the Starball in her locker, like it's not on her person, right? Um, and she is now suffering significant withdrawal from not having it. I'll just like spoiler here. The Starball communicates with her via radio waves, and when it's sealed away in like a locker or some other like Faraday cage type situation, it loses the ability to communicate with her. Um, yeah. So right now she's going through like an intense. Oh, speaking of withdrawal, it's fucking NAD, man. It doesn't work. I keep thinking it'll start doing something. Spuddy was telling me to like double up the dose or whatever, but I'm not gonna do that. I just feel no difference whatsoever, man. Might as well be sugar pills. Maybe it is sugar pills, and just they're laughing all the way to the bank because they have my $50. But I was willing to take the gamble. I trust Wheaton, kid. Um, so Jira is taking the same stuff and it doesn't do shit. Yeah, man, I want my fucking money back from these characters. Well, he said it takes like 2 or 3 days to happen. The other part of it is I bet like you and I are both just too lazy for this to work on us. Like I think you might notice a more pronounced effect if you're doing like a lot of lifting weights and stuff like that. And I'm just, like obviously not lifting anywhere near enough weights. So that might be it, that we're just like so dormant that we have no use for the extra energy. provided by NAD. But I don't know. Like, yeah, maybe I'll try and work out a little bit more and see if I notice any kind of impact there. Because I think most of the people that are taking this are people who are doing significant weightlifting. Um, ridiculous. Uh, on top of all that, well, she couldn't. Okay, so let's try this new paragraph. The class ended, and she still hadn't figured out anything. Her head was full of people she was supposed to call. She needed to call Mr. Mathis to cancel the lesson. She ought to call Dan and ask him for help. She was supposed to call Dr. Garbuglio and let him know she was having suicidal thoughts. Hovering over everything else was a certainty that she should have called the authorities about the Starball long ago. But she couldn't do any of that. Everyone was getting up to leave. They all looked so enthusiastic to be anywhere else. Freya was the last one in the class, and she knew Mr. Manzini was staring at her, but she just couldn't get up. She shut the book and started to cry silently. A big fat teardrop hit the construction paper Book of Shame cover and soaked into it. She tried to pull it together, but she failed at that too. She hid her face in her arms and sobbed against the desk. I can't do it. I can't, she wept into the sleeve of her jacket. She cried until she felt Mr. She kept her head down until she felt Mr. Manzini's hand on her shoulder. Hey, 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 Mr. Manzini kept saying. It's okay. The world was bleary with tears. Her nose was running down her face, and Mr. Manzini scraped to his desk and brought her a wad of Kleenex. I'm sorry, she said, trying to clean herself up. So let's take out this brand name here. Wad of tissues. Mr. Manzini scraped to his desk and brought her a wad of tissues. I'm sorry, Freya said, trying to clean herself up. At least she was too numb to feel embarrassed. That would come later. I shouldn't have given you that. I'm so sorry, Freya, Mr. Manzini said. So Mr. Manzini, let's when we do the actual read through, let's give him like a very toned down Mario voice. I shouldn't have given you that. I'm so sorry, Freya. I shouldn't have given you that. I'm so sorry, Freya, Mr. Manzini said. He tore the cover off the Book of Shame, balled it up and threw it at the trash can across the room, missing completely. I don't know what I was thinking. Please forgive me. No, it's all my fault. I just can't think. I can't concentrate at all. I shouldn't even be here. I'm sorry for messing up your class. You're not messing anything up. It's perfectly natural for you to have difficulty. I know you're trying your best, Mr. Manzini said, and that made her start crying again. Her best was staring off into space and weeping in class. It took her a while to get herself together, and when Mr. Manzini uncertainly asked if she wanted him to call someone, she shook her head. I just want to go home, she said, and he nodded. It will get better, I promise you. She knew he was wrong. It'll get better, I promise you, Mr. Manzini said. She knew he was wrong. Freya stared at Dan's text again. She told herself if she could just make it home, she would be able to answer it. She told herself if she could make it through the bike ride home, she would be strong enough to answer it. Her only chance for making it through the guitar lesson was to try and run beforehand, though she had no idea how she would find. Though she had no idea where she would find the energy. Freya stared at Dan's text again. Freya stared at Dan's text again, still unable to reply. Hmm. Freya stared at Dan's text again. She was still unable to reply and knew it was getting weirder every. Okay, so shoutouts to Jira. She should get that NAD energy. Yeah, thanks for popping into the stream right here. Yeah, I think really good work on the first part of this chapter so far. I'm pretty pleased with it, to tell you the truth. I wish I didn't have to go to work today. I would like to just work on this all damn day. Freya stared at Dan's text again. With every minute that passed, it got weirder she hadn't replied to him. She told herself if she could make it through the bike ride home, she would be strong enough to answer. Her only chance for making it through the guitar lesson was to try and. Her only chance for surviving the guitar lesson was to try and run beforehand, though she had no idea where she would find the energy. She had to walk past her locker on her way to the bike rack, and she stopped outside it for a moment, trying to see if she could feel anything. There was only emptiness. There was only emptiness. Her insides were sobbed out and raw. The wind blasted her as she opened the door to the bike racks, and she remembered her jacket and gloves were in the locker. Could she even make it back without them? Her bicycle was still the only one on the rack. Right away, she could see something was wrong. The tires were both flat. The tires were both flat, and the seat was all ripped up. Someone had slashed her tires. So I don't want to use the. I think like sometimes they'll call like a bicycle seat a throne or something. Ugh. Okay, so her bicycle was still the only one on the rack. Right away, she could see something was wrong. Someone had slashed her tires and cut up the seat. Freya stood there, stunned. She looked around, her hand clenched into a fist. She looked around, clenching her hands into fists. Who had done it? Jane? Tammy? Malcolm? For the second time today, she felt anger, and now it burned in her empty stomach. She wanted to scream. But that was what whoever had done this wanted. They wanted her to react. They wanted to scream at her in the hallway. They wanted to throw rocks at her through windows, to give her black eyes and call her a snitch in front of everyone, just to see what she would do. She'd been to the range many times. Freya pictured herself taking Randall's gun down from its shelf. She'd been to the range many times. She was a good shot. She could take them all with her. The idea burned so bitterly that she nearly threw up. The idea burned in her so bitterly that she nearly threw up. She looked around at the car. She looked down to the cars idling in the pickup lane. Which was one of them Malcolm's? Was the whole pack of them waiting around the corner, hoping to see her crying? They were too late. She had nothing left. Did they actually think she could scare? Did they actually think they could scare her with this bullshit? Did they actually think they could scare her like this? She was more of a threat to herself than all of them put together. She was getting cold, staring at her savage bicycle. Her jacket was in her locker, and she was getting cold staring at her savage bicycle. Freya took out her phone and took pictures of everything, getting a closer look at the damage. At least they hadn't messed up the shifters. New tires, new tubes, and a new seat. She could do it all herself. She would bring tools tomorrow and fix the bicycle right in front of everyone in the afternoon. Let him know she didn't care at all. She glanced around for any clue of who'd done it, and then her eyes settled on the camera right over the door. Of course. They were so stupid. Freya shook her head and went back inside. I like the little Freyer. Did we determine if it was the only bike on the rack earlier? It's the only one on the rack. No, yeah, still the only one on the rack. Yeah, she's the only one riding to school because she's a fucking weirdo. Freya shook her head and went back inside, walking past the auditorium where the choir people were warming up. It was just so much effort. She would have to go to the office. Everyone would have another reason to call her a snitch. Mr. Evers would get mad. Officer Ed would be called in. It would be another big deal. She had a low, whispering thought that she could go home without telling anyone about this. She could call a cab. The bike could just stay there, rusting on the rack all winter until they cut off the lock and threw it away. She wouldn't be there to see it. Freya slipped the phone out of her pocket. She had an excuse to call Mr. Mathis now. But she was too upset to talk. The anger was still burning beneath every breath she took. Randall's gun. She tried to push the thought away. Better to just disappear. But she realized if they found her, everyone would think she'd killed herself over a stupid bicycle. Whoever had done this would think it was all them. They'd think they'd won. She would have to weigh herself down well so that didn't happen. Then she realized she had no way to get to the rapids tonight without the bicycle. She would have to walk the whole way. Cars would see her walking down the road. It was hard to just disappear. She found herself sitting in front of her locker, number 1642. Another low and whispering feeling. Another low feeling whispered to her. If she was going to kill herself anyway, what the hell was she fighting against? So here is a spot where we can use a colon. Another low feeling whispered to her. If she was going to kill herself anyway, what the hell was she fighting against? If the Starball wanted to use her, so what? At least it wanted her. She wanted to die every single minute. Just a second. She'd wish she were dead every single minute. If the Starball wanted to use her, so what? At least it wanted her. She'd wish she were dead every single moment the Starball had been sealed in the locker. Freya reached out to the dial and turned the combination, hesitating before she pulled the lock. What if the Starball was angry? What if it drove her insane? What if she was already insane and there had never been a Starball, and this was all one long, drawn-out delusion? Anywhere but here. Anyone but herself. Okay, so that has to be that has to be one paragraph. Freya took off the lock, and the moment she opened the locker door, she could feel it, like she'd stepped from darkness into the full light of the sun. How had she been oblivious to this for so long? When her fingertips touched the glossy shell of the Starball, she felt a tingling warmth radiating up her arm. The feeling intensified, and the padlock tumbled from her hand with a clack against the floor. Mm-hmm. The feeling intensified, and the padlock tumbled from her hand with a clack against the polished concrete floor. She had to brace herself against the wall of lockers. Yeah, so running at the back of my mind, was the fact that I think earlier too, we don't describe that this is a padlock. It's ambiguous um, here, and we can actually roll back to chapter 42, the first locker scene. Yeah, this is actually a spot where I too was like, we need to do some cleanup here. So let's go back to 41. Mm-hmm. So in this story, it's a padlock, and I think originally it was like one of those ones where it was like built in to the locker, but we swapped it to being a padlock on like a little latch, just because I wanted to have the moment where she drops it with a clack onto the floor because I wanted some audio in that scene. Let's go here. Okay, this is the scene where she does the padlock. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's funny, right? That um like I'm on the exact same wavelength with Stratum and his comments up here, where as I was working through that chapter, I'm like trying to envision what the lock is like. It's weird how our minds like when we get to like this is a door lock and everything, we're they're like almost crying out like I want specificity. What's actually happening here? Because I think people are trying to picture exactly what's happening, and locks are a spot where like everybody has this understanding that locks are like very specific and they'll only work if you do things a certain way and so forth. So I think we have like a natural inclination that when we're talking about locks in the story, people would like a little bit more specificity. So that's a good note from Stratum right here. I think it's a good idea. Let me just read his comments here exactly. Um, be some visual description of her holding the lock to turn the dial before she opens it. It just mentions that she turns the dial. Some lockers have built-in dials, some don't. It'd be good to describe it so we can picture the lockers more clearly. For me, when I'm picturing lockers in high school, I can see it a lot more clearly from my head when I get that description of what type of lock it is. And I think part of that may just be um, that Stratum and I probably share some of that same like spectrum, like fascination with locks. I will tell you that like I worked in a long time for like computer consulting type stuff, and that the that like you will anytime that you have like a systems administrator type person, like odds are they know how to pick locks, right? It has nothing to do with their job, other than like we frequently have to deal with things that are locked and get into them because we forget the key or whatever. There, it's like a combination of us being having to secure things and being, for the most part, like pretty forgetful and wizard like. Uh, and just all of us can pick lock. Like I can pick a lock, not well, because I was also like a bad systems administrator type consultant type person, but just the spectrum of people that do that kind of work, they all are like fascinated with locks for whatever reason. Uh, as Freya turned the combination dial of her padlock, a bolt of nausea struck. Yeah, there we go. She got the locker open. Okay, cool. So there, shout outs also to giving that comment early enough that I can remember that we have another scene where it's not clear what kind of lock it is, and where when we foreshadow with that other scene, it'll be more effective here. Um, yeah, like there's definitely like a attention window. Like if we just like push that away, I might not remember 10 days from now or in the next edit or whatever that we have that other lock that we need to or that same lock that we need to describe in a similar way. So it's good to, it's good to bring these things up while we still have time to correct them, because we may not remember, especially things that have to do with the reality of what's happening, like the object permanence and the just sort of the mechanics of the story. Those are critical because we don't want to mess any of that up. We would like to have There'd be no, like, things don't actually work that way. We'd like to, there'd be no, like, a mailbox is red in one scene and it's green in another. I don't want there to be fucking glitches in the matrix of this book, right? No double cats or whatever. Or, I can't believe they're making a fourth. Why? Why? Why Wachowskis? Although, honestly, like, I would be fascinated if the Wachowskis just went like full on personal experience and the Matrix 4 was like all about trans issues. I would watch that movie, right? That'd be fucking wild. Uh, fucking amazing. Anyhow, let's go back to our locker right here. Uh-huh. You become trans when there is an update to your matrix simulation where your digital gender changes from your biological gender. Huh. Oh, that's kind of weird. Yeah, yeah, where they're trying to run like different hardware on different things. Maybe maybe in the aftermath of the first matrix, there's like a secondary matrix where it has to cut all these fucking corners. And so it's just trying to run several different people on one person's brain. And it's you could get into like crazy uh like you could get into like really crazy like multiple personalities, split realities. There's a lot of interesting ways where they could take that franchise that they didn't do in either of like the second and third movies. Like why were those movies even there? Like we were just totally fine after the first movie. Ooh, ooh, yeah. I just really shitty series. Good first movie. Um, really enjoyed it. Went and saw it like 2 or 3 times, but no real reason to ever ever fucking go about it. All right, so hold on. Just an FYI, Iran offered an $80 million bounty on Donatello Trump. Why didn't they just make it $1 billion? You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to pay it out if they're doing a purely symbolic gesture, uh, unless they were trying to insult him by offering a bounty that was so low. Or maybe that's just like all the like petty cash they had on hand. They're like, all right, Hamid, look in the drawer, and then looks like we have $80 billion or $80 million left from, because they had those big pallets full of money from the end of the deal where we were returning their assets to them. Anyhow, mm, mm, mm. Freya held her padlock and twisted in the combination. She hesitated before she pulled it open. Why is pulled? How's that a word? To cry in a thin voice, to whine or whimper. Oh my god. I'd never heard that. Where's Wiktionary? Ugh. Uh, I can't spell how they spell. Wikionary. Wiktionary. Okay, that's why. Why would they fucking do that? I'm getting a little bit of the Mandela effect looking at that right there. So Puel, uh, too cheap as a chicken. Oh wow, yeah, I like this word. I wonder what it's how useful it is there. Wiktionary. Uh, Pulin in German. So it's originally French. Pilard, a cheap, a plaintive, melancholy wine. It's a good word. Uh, oh, there's a way that you can see um, there's frequency checkers, text analysis tools, Ngram viewer. Okay, so we can look at the corpus of books. So Puel was popular in 1820, and right now it's you can see a short spike in 1990. This is just through 2000. Let's take it to 2020. Oh, they only go up to their Ngram viewer is only to let's search lots of books here. Pueled. So Pueled has been rising in popularity here, and then Pueled, very popular in like 1918 for whatever reason. Huh, that's kind of interesting. I like this Ngram viewer there. So that's kind of cool. Uh, the things that you learn, like fucking, it's our word of the day, Pueled. Um, but I don't think it's a tough one because it's so close to pulled that I think a lot of people will just assume that it's a typo. Um, so, whew. What if the Starball was angry? What if it drove her insane? What if she was already insane and there had never been a Starball? What if this was all one long, drawn out delusion? Anywhere but here, anyone but herself. Freya took off the lock, and the moment she opened the locker door, she could feel it, like she'd stepped from darkness into the full light of the sun. How had she been oblivious to this for so long? When her fingertips touched the glossy shell of the Starball, she felt the tingling warmth radiating up her arm. The feeling intensified, and the padlock tumbled from her hand with a clack against the polished concrete floor. She had to brace herself against the lockers with her other hand to keep from falling over. She was shuddering. Her breath came. Mm-hmm. I hate heart was pounding. That should never be in a book. Remove she was from triggering. Let's take a look. Shuddering. She had to brace herself to trigger an header. She was shuddering. Mm. Okay, so there we wanted to get the word came out of there, and then feel her pulse in her ears now. I don't like that. The feeling intensified, and the padlock tumbled from her other hand. Freya began to shudder. She had to brace herself against the locker to keep from falling over. Her eyes rolled upward, and she gasped for breath. She'd nearly come, just from touching the orb. Whatever the starball was, it no longer felt the need to be subtle. I don't care. Do whatever you want, she whispered, and the feeling found equilibrium as it settled over her. The rush found equilibrium as it settled over her, like a kind of pleasant hum in her bones. The peace she'd wanted so badly came with it. Mm-hmm. The world was sliding back into focus. Why had she fought against this? Maybe the starball was only trying to help her all along. She ran through the things an alien intelligence might want: building a stargate, infiltrating the government, acquiring plutonium. Um, we have to look up grammar rules for ellipses. I don't know if you can end a sentence with that. Uh, Use ellipses when omitting a word, phrase, line, paragraph, or more from a quoted passages. Punctuation rules. The Big Blue Book of Grammar. Oh, speaking of which, I'm looking for like an app or something like that that teaches English grammar, or like a good book or something for it. If anybody has any recommendations, I would be interested. So yeah, maybe I'll just search for best grammar app and just pick one. I just want, like, when I'm on the subway to like thumb through basically like a grammar primer and try to get like a little bit stronger at the grammar. Use an ellipses when omitting a word, phrase, paragraph, or quoted passage from a quoted passage. Three-dot method is the simplest. Feel no spaces are necessary. Other enclose the before or after. A four-dot method. There's a four-dot method in legal works. Delete the beginning of a sentence. Rule 2, they can express trailing off, thoughts trailing off. Indicate a pause or wavering in an otherwise straightforward sentence. I will tell you that in my experience with editors, it has mostly just been that they don't want ellipses used almost anywhere. So I have like a little PTSD from being corrected, but I think we can get away with this. We're trailing off her train of thought. In fact, this should be a new paragraph right here. She ran through the things an alien intelligence might want: building a Stargate, infiltrating the government, acquiring plutonium. Yeah, so there's that long pause. There was no response. No sense the Starball wanted any of those things, or that I could even understand her. There was only calm. Freya tucked the Starball into her pocket where it belonged and decided she would deal with the bike tomorrow. She took out her phone to call a cab, but before she did, she flipped to her text and replied to Dan. Freya, it was so stupid. I can't believe Radomir slapped her. They made up a little in the office. Sorry it took a while to get back to you. I was bummed about it earlier, but I'm feeling better now. Thanks for asking. So one thing I worry about a little bit is that too abrupt of a shift from somebody who's like about to like thinking about like murdering her classmates and thinking about suicide, and now we're perky. It feels like a little bit much. Yeah, like so this is okay. The exclamation point is there. Uh Thanks you for checking on me. Oh, no, we won't actually do that right there. Um, she thought about adding more, but stopped herself. She reached into her pocket and brushed her fingertips against the Starball. Telling herself she would never let it go again. Okay, cool. So big improvements. Oh, and we actually made it to chapter 45. Okay, so how are we doing on coffee there? Yeah, I'm really having to pace myself on coffee because these cans are just too fucking small. Like I like the coffee, I just would like to have like a big old thing of cold brew there. Maybe I'll maybe it's time to start shopping for other cold brew. Yeah, I need to find like the right amount there. I haven't had like a month where I went off caffeine in about 7 or 8 years at this point, and I think it would be pretty dramatic if I did. Maybe at the conclusion of this edit, we'll try and reset my caffeine tolerance with like a month of no caffeine, but no promises, man. I really look forward. I'm definitely have some level of addiction to coffee. Okay, give me 5 minutes. Actually, 3 minutes, and I shall return. Well, that was scarcely 3 minutes at all, right there. Yeah, one thing I've noticed is that my audience participation just jumps way down anytime that I like leave and get coffee or whatever. So trying not to do that. Yeah, because it's really helpful to. Let's see. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, that's kind of an interesting note. So Stratum just said on YouTube state-funded broadcasts like RT, for example, or Memory TV or Al Jazeera, um, that aren't U.S. or British, they say funded in whole or in part by ex-government. And in U.S. British examples, it says is a blank public broadcast service. And he says that that is a subtle propaganda, um, which is kind of interesting there. I don't know to what degree I would call NPR state propaganda, right? Um, yeah, it's difficult. They definitely have like a decent reputation for being somewhat objective, but I also can't listen to NPR without feeling nauseous. I don't know, something about the way that they do their broadcast, man. They're like droning, low level, whatever. I can't stand it. That was wild. Freya tried to communicate telepathically with the starball during the cab ride home, but it would not respond. When she got home, she tried tapping in Morse, holding her phone next to the orb with notes open. She tried tapping on the orb in Morse, holding her phone next to it with notes open. Freya tried to communicate telepathically with the starball during the cab ride home, but it would not respond. When she got home, she tried tapping on the orb in Morse and setting her phone beside it with pages open, but nothing got a reaction. So what I'm trying to say there is she's setting her phone next to it with like a word processing application open. Um, so I don't think that anybody uses word processor any longer. That's like mhm. But nothing got a reaction. That's much stronger. When she got home, she tried tapping on the orb in Morse and setting her phone beside it with a blank note open, but nothing got a reaction. She wondered if the starball could understand language at all. or if it only reacted to emotion. She tried making herself feel angry and happy, but she only felt like a loon for making faces at a marble. She cooked 3 eggs after not. She fried 3 eggs and she fried 3 eggs and devoured them. Uh, After she failed to get through, Freya fried 3 eggs, drizzled green yucateca on top, and devoured them. Is that the right spelling? It's yucateco. Yeah. El yucateco. Drizzled green El yucateco on top and devoured them. After not eating anything all day, she could have cooked the whole dozen, but she wanted to run after guitar practice. Her appetite was big. But she hoped to go for a run after guitar practice. Her appetite was back in a big way. It was almost time for her lesson, and she brought the ovation into the living room and tuned it. She put her foot up on the coffee table as she warmed up her fingers. Lassa would have gone insane, but she wasn't here. She strummed a few chords, looking for whatever she'd felt this morning and trying to sort out what was her and what was the star ball. She didn't find it. Mr. Mathis arrived, dressed in black as always. He carried his guitar case inside with halting steps. Freya could tell his arthritis was acting up again, but she knew better than to try and carry his case for him. Randall had done that once, and Mr. Mathis had nearly bitten his head off. "We doing our thing out here, Miss Freya?" he asked, uncertainty in his eyes as he glanced around. Ancient and ornery as he was, Mr. Mathis was still wary of Lassa's wrath. Ancient and ornery as Mr. Mathis was, he was still wary of Lassa's wrath. "She's away. Let's work here. How are you, Mr. Mathis?" "Same as it ever was," he said, the words as rehearsed as any song he knew. Every lesson she asked him the same thing, and the reply never changed. He settled onto the leather armchair by the couch, shifting back and forth and nodding, his bottom lip jutting with approval. And then nodding in approval at the new arrangement. He bent and opened the case that was plastered in so many layers of stickers she thought there might not even be any leather left under it. The latest additions were a string of Devon's Blues barbecue locations from the Midwest. They were oval shape, and each location was a different color of the rainbow. Mr. Mathis removed his guitar from the case as delicately as if it were made of glass. It was a piano black D'Angelico New Yorker with gold accents, and he tuned it the same way he'd taught her, first by ear, and then he checked each string with the battered Korg chromatic tuner, nodding when everything was perfect. He ran his fingers along the fretboard and warmed up, his eyes narrowing at the ache in his hands. Hmm. His eyes narrowing from arthritic pain. He strummed 4 C chords and tilted his head, listening to the sounds decay in the high ceilings of the living room. Sounds better in here, he said, nodding to her room. The acoustics are improved, but how about the playing? What do you got for me? She started playing, and after a moment he nodded, acknowledging the joke. She was playing Stormy Monday. You know something I don't about the weather? He asked, raising his eyes suspiciously to the triangular window facing the east. Don't smile. You flubbed twice in a row on that solo. The whole thing's too fast. Settle down. Play it more like this. If his fingers ached, Freya couldn't hear it. Mr. Mathis played the solo perfectly, then slowed down the pace on the part she'd struggled with and played it again. She tried once more and made the same mistake. Fingers here, like this. Slower. You got all the time in the world. It's easy to make that mistake. Try again. Easy to make that mistake. Try again. It took 4 tries to nail the solo, but she got it, and she felt herself loosening through the last play. Freya felt herself loosening through the last play, letting the notes just ring out. Mr. Mathis tilted his head, listening, and he gave her a nod. That's right. What else you got for me? He asked, and she worked through a few more of the songs they'd worked on. Mm-hmm. And she strummed through a few more of the songs they'd worked on. She was playing well, but not quite like she had that morning. She wondered if she'd only dreamed it. The hour was almost up when Freya tried playing Wild Horses as a last shot to recapture the feeling. She couldn't quite reach it, and as she strove for it, she fumbled the notes. She tried to go on, but he held up a hand to stop her. Getting ahead of yourself. You're forcing it. Try something you practice more. Song needs a 12-string anyhow. Let me try one more time, she asked, and again there was that tilt of his head, but he nodded. It's your hour, he said. Freya took a deep breath and shut her eyes, then opened them again. Mr. Mathis was watching her closely, a tired look in his ancient brown eyes. He didn't really expect that much from her, and she wanted to surprise him. She began to play, trying to focus on nothing but the music. With each note, more of the effort slipped away until she found herself dancing a step ahead of everything, hitting every note just right. All the suffering of the day bled out of the guitar, and the song was alive in the air, slow and mournful. When she finished the song, she could feel it humming in her hands. She looked at When she finished the song, she could still feel it humming in her hands. When she finished the song, she still felt it humming in her hands. She looked up at Mr. Mathis, wondering if he would just nod and say, "That's right," the way he always did. But instead, he smiled at her, with his smile full of But instead, he grinned at her with his smile full of gaps and snags. I like that as I'm reading it. There are gaps and snags in the reading. But instead, he grinned at her with his smile full of gaps and snags. He brought his hands together with 3 soft claps, too light to hurt. I've been waiting 6 years to hear that, he said. That right there, that's what all the practice is for. You keep it up and you'll get there, time and time again. She didn't spoil his words with her own. She just beamed, and there was no awkwardness between them. They had an understanding. At last he looked at his gold watch and nodded. I got something for you, he said, delicately returning his guitar to his case. To its case. From his breast pocket, he took out From his breast pocket, he took out 2 pale blue tickets and held them out to her. Joe Bonamassa was playing at Swallow Hall in Bangor on Friday night. Ezekiel Miracle Mathis was the opening act. When that man was 12 years old, he opened for B.B. King. Now I'm 66, and I'm about to open for him. Time don't make no sense, Mr. Mathis complained, but he was still smiling a bit. Oh, wow, thank you, she said, clutching the tickets. I'll be there. Those are good seats, too. Bring your mama if you want to. I can't speak for Joe, but I'm going to put on a show. Those are good seats, too. Bring your mama if you want to. I can't speak for Joe, but I'm going to put on a show. Mr. Mathis had a sly little grin. But when he lifted his case, he winced it away. He made his slow way out the door and shut it behind him. She tucked the tickets into her wallet and brushed against the star ball in her pocket. Playing better. It's a good chapter. I like that. So this should be 46, I think, there. Okay, so let's think a little bit about what we did in this chapter and what we might do in a reprise here. So here, this is her making more of an effort to communicate with the star ball, which I think is like a neat direction to go in there. I like that whole part. The star ball will not respond to her. And if you're out there like watching and you're a reader, why do you think the star ball is not talking with her at this point, right? When it's come so close to, from its perspective, sealed in that thing, losing contact, it must have thought that it just about lost everything. But still, it makes no effort to communicate with her. And we know that the star ball can understand her, right? It's the human language is no longer a barrier to it. It's had quite a while to work on this problem. So if you're wondering, I'm definitely interested to know what you people think here. One of our big goals for this rewrite is to change both the power level for the star ball and the pacing for the revelation of information about the star ball. And we want it to make more sense. We want it to track a little bit better. At the same time, we're trying to bring up the threat level of the Malcolm Lewis thread a little bit there. And so the star ball is definitely one where very open to outside feed about this doesn't feel right, or I think you should talk a little bit less about this, or like just want to know what the fuck is going on with this thing already. I'm sick of waiting. I don't want to hear about guitar class. So all like valuable insights, and everybody's going to feel a little different about this. Governor shadow banning all attempts to communicate. Oh God, Spathy's a fucking real one right there. Ugh. Yeah, man. Maybe the star ball is just like in mode +M and it doesn't have voice. Know what I'm saying? So I like the addition of green El Yucateco on top of the hot sauce there. So Spathywa has not read beyond this point, so this is all going to be new to him right here, which is interesting. That's fascinating. I like that. Does it need a star ball chapter to explain it dealing with being put away in lockers? I'm pretty sure that comes up in a little bit, and especially like as you're listening through this, very interested in any points where you're like, this is a good opportunity for the star ball to talk more, because there aren't a sufficient number of star ball chapters in the story, and whenever we have a place where we feel like the action needs to be broken up a little bit from like the continual Freya, what we want to put in there are Fragile Phoenix chapters and Starball chapters to kind of give readers a break from keep in mind, like, this is like a relationship with this girl, and the reader is gonna need some me time, because we're, imagine dating this girl. Jesus, it'd be so fucking wild. So anyhow, so we had the Green Yucateco. So this is the first arrival of Mr. Mathis, who has been foreshadowed as kind of like this cranky old man. But here in the chapter, he comes across much softer, right? And so she's still writing in kind of like the afterglow of being returned to the Starball. A few things that I like here. The piano black, it's a teardrop. It's a piano black teardrop D'Angelico New Yorker. So let me show you what that looks like. So this is, let me see, looks like this. Fuck you, Pinterest. God, fucking hate Pinterest so much. Okay, so here's what the D'Angelico New Yorker looks like. So you can kind of imagine this in piano black with gold accents. So they made the D'Angelico teardrop. They just made a few of these for people. So the blues guitar is let me see. So the guitar style that she's learning is very blues oriented, and I think Mr. Mathis is like just like a straight up old blues man. So more Starball chapters can make it a lot more clear that it just isn't just a lump of stuff and is always actively engaged. It's true. So we'll go through a little bit. Basically, as you're reading through this, if you spot places where you're like, this is a little much, I need a break from some of this nonsense. Um, we don't want to overwhelm the reader with these chapters either, because they're difficult chapters, right? They're written in this like kind of awkward perspective, and there are a lot of exposition, and they should really only be like a page or two at the most, maybe three for some of these guys. But it's definitely like a difficult balancing act, and one where we may well need the services of a professional editor to come through and be like, yo, this or that or whatever. That's a pretty looking guitar. I can just imagine that in black and gold trim. I think it would be gangsta as fuck. So that's his guitar. And I like that because her mom is away, she's like, let's play in the living room, which is something that would never been permitted before. Okay. There we go. Playing better. Cool. And so it's like a tie back to that other chapter there. I have no idea what happens in chapter 46 here. So let's recenter. What are we doing time wise? 8:12. Let's see how long this is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, cool. It's just 5 pages. So let's take a look at Stratum's feedback here. So at this point in the story, it doesn't seem very clear when she is with the Starball, she is with something that can engage, like how we react to her being with the doctor in her mind. I don't understand what you're trying to say there. Yeah, can you restate that? Or maybe that's just the beginning of that paragraph. But, well, up until this point in the story, like the Starball hasn't like not been directly engaging in any way. Everything's been like these subtle, kind of like little twinges and so forth. And it's not until basically the chapter where Jane slaps her, which is I think 43 or something like that. It's not until chapter 43 that we just outright have the admission like this thing is trying to control her. Um, yeah, it hasn't been like an active force up until this point, and this is sort of the turning point where more so there's the understanding that like she's basically made a deal with the devil here. Like just make me happy and I'll do whatever the fuck you want. Um, which is kind of an interesting choice, and one that we can like delve more into. But yeah. Let me wait a second. Try to get some clarity on where you're going with that. But let's work on chapter 46 whilst you're composing your thoughts. Freya checked her phone after the lesson. Okay, there we go. So now that we know that she gets a rise out of just being with the star ball physically, being around it, it seems we should have much more of a personable understanding, uh, buddy film reaction to being with it rather than holding or having it. So it's kind of like an interesting um, idea. So I think what we're saying here is we could see more of Freya starting to anthropomorphize the orb, to think of it more in terms of like a personality rather than just an object here. And so this is something within the book. I don't think we ever make the star ball out to be more of a personality and less of a device. You know what I mean? That may be a spot where we could potentially, in this rewrite, do an improvement. We could give the star ball like a clear personality, which it lacks at the moment there. Right now, it just kind of, if we think about the star ball's personality, it's like this very exacting, purpose driven, sort of mechanical, like I have a goal and I will achieve this goal. But we also, Freya doesn't have enough data right now to assign a personality to this thing other than like, hey, if I have this with me, like life is not so shitty. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting thought that we can think about. How do people react to things that are like pulling them out of darkness, like the love that somebody might have for heroin or something like that? It's like, fucking heroin. You're so good, heroin. You're like the greatest fucking thing in the world, right? Or like similarly, if you're in a relationship that's kind of pulling you out of darkness, you can start to kind of idealize the other person and not have like a clearer view of their flaws. And so these are great things to consider when we're thinking about the star ball. And I think actually, like, let's go through this chapter that we got right here, because I'm looking down the line here. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became that there would be an empty seat next to her, and her plus one would be a rock from outer space. Oh, damn. So maybe we'll get into it, but these are definitely interesting thoughts to go into. The fact we can really shade a little bit into sort of responses to addiction. So let's add some notes about this. Okay. Yeah, I'm not talking about like, let's make the star ball like a fucking talking parrot here with a voiced by Gilbert Gottfried. But like right now it's like so little personality that I'd call it like apersonal. But Yeah, that's interesting. This is a short chapter, so I think we can get through with it. Let's try and get through with it by like 8:45 if we can. So Freya checked her phone after the lesson, but there was no response from Dan. She'd been so excited to get to... But as she thought about it, she realized she didn't have anyone to take. Who knew if Lasse was even going to be home? She didn't know Dan well enough to invite him to a concert. She tried to picture inviting Radomir. He'd stood up for her after all, but even thinking about it felt awkward. The more she considered it, the more certain she became that there would be an empty seat next to her, and her plus one would be a rock from outer space. The more Freya considered it. She spent almost an hour trying to untangle everything she'd missed in trigonometry, working back through the lessons and searching online when she couldn't figure things out. She was further behind than she'd thought, but it wouldn't be impossible to catch up if she didn't. Freya was further behind than she'd thought, but it wouldn't be impossible to catch up if she didn't slip back into the pit. She worked on it until mm-hmm. Freya was further behind than she'd thought, but it wouldn't be impossible to catch up if she didn't slip back into the pit. The starball wouldn't let that happen. Her fingers dipped back into her pocket for assurance. The starball wouldn't let that happen. Okay, yeah. So there's adding like a little tiny more note. Um, now now she's starting to actually that's like a really as I'm considering it, like a really powerful note to think harder about how she starts to rely on this external force. Like that's the thing that's holding her together. So definitely, I think it's a really good note to think about that a little bit more, and just add like a few tiny things, right? Because like if you read through this entire thing, it's a pretty okay book as is. It's not like we need to make, in my mind, major sweeping changes. It's a lot of tightening and ratcheting up and smoothing out transitions, rather than we're like blowing up entire chapters or anything like that. Though, as always, a real editor may feel differently. All right, hold on. I have something I want to do there. Freya was further behind than she thought, but maybe she could catch back up if she didn't slip back into the pit. Her fingers dipped into her pocket for reassurance. The starball wouldn't let that happen. She struggled through lessons. Mm-hmm. She struggled with the textbook until she felt like she wasn't making any more progress. Until she felt like she wasn't making progress any longer, and then it was time to run. Freya went into the garage and took Randall's bike down from the racks. So, sadly, now we have to go back because I don't think. Does she put it back on the wall? That's fine. Okay. Randall's bike. Oh yeah. Okay, cool. So she does lift it back up against the wall. Perfect. Object permanence, boys. It's not just improv. It's here as well. Freya went into the garage and took Randall's bike down from the wall. Mm-hmm. Freya Atreides, God Emperor of Dune, she announced to the garage. Oh my god. What a nerd. Oh, does she adjust the seat later? Okay. She looked at Randall's truck. There was a thin film of dust covering it. He wasn't around to wash it on Sunday mornings anymore. Freya had a sudden desire to wash the truck herself. She pictured herself out in there in the driveway, freezing and washing a truck no one drove in the dark, and decided that was insane. She told herself if Lasso was still gone on Sunday morning, she could wash the truck. She ought to just get her license and start driving it. She'd had her learner's permit since she was 15. Randall had taught her to drive his truck in the library parking lot. She could remember the truck buckling forward and stalling out again and again as she tried to get a hang on the clutch. She'd gotten frustrated and asked why she couldn't learn on an automatic first. He told her she would need to drive stick when he was retired, and she was chauffeuring him around Europe. Randall had grinned and told her he would need to drive stick when she was retired, and she was chauffeuring him around Europe. The transmission had taken a pounding, but she'd mostly gotten the hang of it, though cars that got too close to her rear end while she was up a hill still... Okay. She got the hang of the clutch. She got the hang of the clutch, though cars that got too close to her rear end while she was on a hill still filled her with mortal terror. Mm-hmm. So in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Thustra, he refers to his pride, and wisdom as his animals, as an eagle and a serpent who are with him in the story. They don't talk to him, but he speaks to them, poses questions to them. I point out that to communicate, the idea he often communicates he isn't alone. If it's a we and an us situation, even though he's truly alone, with second person being something only he knows. That's like an interesting concept right there. An interesting concept, and one that is almost you're a little bit of stratum Atreides yourself there. We get into a lot of that later in the book. The concept of we and oh shit, I can't type into the chat. So T Zanger in the chat is picking up some Zach ZYZ books. If somebody could relay to him, he's picking up Hawks at the Diner and The Right to Bear Arms. Let me see. So T Zanger doesn't know IRC is like that. Yeah, if you could let him know in the chat that I recommend he also pick up Survival Mode and start there. Those are the ones that are most likely to like, and they're all pretty short. So like each of those is just a subway ride over. I just need to remember to hop to them. We are not going to get to finish editing this chapter, by the way, before today, but that's okay. Let's get as far as we can, and then I'd like to spend a little bit of time pumping iron. Well, actually, it's 8:31 right now. Let's stop. That way I can go talk to him. We're not going to get through this chapter, but I like where it's going. This is a good place to stop. Let's start again from the beginning tomorrow on chapter 46. And that way we don't have to do a read through first thing. Yeah, I think I should go back and read through Thus Spoke Zarathustra, or I should also learn how to pronounce that whole thing. It might be worth taking a gander at, and I need to read some stuff on the subway. All right, so one thing that I am going to try and do, it's going to shave off a little bit of our editing, but I'm going to try and end these streams at 8:30. I might try to start at 5:30 and end at 8:30, or maybe start at 6 and then end at 8:30, and just try to stick to like a regular schedule there. Just because I've just been struggling the past 2 or 3 weeks to get the right amount of sleep, and yeah, it's been hard on a playa out here, and I want to. I'm getting into the part of the winter where lack of exercise is really fucking with a nigga, and I want to get more exercising in. So what I may be doing is at 5:30 going and swimming at the Y, then getting here at about 6:30, editing till 8:30, and then lifting some weights until 9 o'clock. So we may just we may cut this down to about 2 hours a day, and like focus a little bit more on maybe like if we're doing all that, we can fit in another session in the night, which I would love to do. Just come home and do another session each day. So maybe it's more reasonable to do 2 in the morning, 2 in the night. And we would get another crew of people if we start doing this at about 7 o'clock. One thing I've noticed from the other show is that having a regular schedule is really important to attract a consistent user base, which is something that I like. So thank you, Stratum, for all your help on that, and Spethiwa, and Jira, who's no longer here, but super helpful. Yeah, like good progress on all this. We're making great, huge steps, and I'm very happy about it. All right, y'all. So you have a good day, and I will leave you with our wonderful intro.